Pugh. I'm a production manager. I'm based at the moment over in York, but for 20 years, more than 20 years, I've had a relationship with Bradford and have been involved with all sorts of things over there for a long time now. I've been working in the sector in production and events for nearly 30 years now. I'm going to go through some slides and things. Hopefully, if you've got me up on speaker view, you'll be able to see things as they come up. I just have to make sure that I'm pressing the right buttons to do this in the right order for you. So the way that well, just turn that off. That's better. The way that my work is sort of communicated or described is that, I provide this comprehensive cross-sector management infrastructure for projects, productions, festival events, and in the cultural and creative industries. It's quite a mouthful, but in a lot of respects, basically, it covers a whole range of those different specialisms and different disciplines that come up in this sort of broad spectrum of production. So over the years, I've been fortunate to work on projects in a wide range of settings, from Mumbai to New York, and in public parks, in heritage sites, in theatres, museums, galleries, town squares, botanical gardens, listed buildings, everything from, as it says there, from rugged moors to NCP car parks. This is just blurb to get us started from my website. To distill it down to the fundamentals that we're talking about. Generally speaking, I get brought in as a freelancer to take complicated settings and partnerships and help make stuff happen. So in the very simplest terms, that's what I do. Just to give you a bit of an idea of my trajectory of how I ended up here, because it's quite a useful thing, I think, to understand. So step back 25 years, 30 years, I started out volunteering in my local theatre, in my local school and things, and was working as a volunteer backstage in the theatre in Harrogate when I was 15, 16 years old, learning different disciplines, working my way around different departments, understanding how stage management worked. I'd do some work, backstage with the lighting crew, work on the sound team. I would get involved with fit-ups and get-outs and that kind of thing. This was back in the day. Bear in mind that obviously I'm very old now. Back in the day when it was okay as a 15-year-old to be working with no training and limited supervision backstage in a professional theatre. So in some respects, quite fortunate to have been able to get that grounding and get that experience. I studied, once I'd finished my A-levels, I went over to Manchester and I studied over there a degree in technical theatre arts at what was a new setup then. This was at the Arden School of Theatre, which was part of the University of Manchester and run in partnership with the Royal Exchange Theatre in the centre of town. So the course actually, I think, only ran for a few more years after I finished it. So it was quite a sort of, a brief thing. But in that course, that study of technical theatre, what we covered was, again, all those disciplines, everything from costuming to set to lighting to sound to production to stage management, as well as all the sort of administrative and the sort of managerial roles, if you like. Outside of that, outside of the studies, one of the advantages of being in a city like Manchester at that moment, this was back, I started in 1994, Manchester was City of Drama. So one of those sort of, European City of Culture type statuses. Manchester was City of Drama at the time that I started. And it meant that the city basically was teeming with activity during that period. New venues opening, site-specific work being commissioned, artists travelling from all over the world to come to the city to perform, festivals and events running constantly, the entire time. And we were quite fortunate that our production management lecturer, so the person that was teaching us at the time, was also the head of production for Manchester as City of Drama. So basically, as students, we would, every weekend get the opportunity to go out and work at different festivals, different events, usually in exchange for, many, many hours of hard graft in exchange for a 4-pack of beer or something like that. Tended to be the sort of fairly standard rates of pay back then. But what it gave us was it gave, a really good foundation in a lot of practical skills, a lot of practical disciplines, a lot of opportunity to see some great work and to work with some engaging and interesting people, and the potential to sort of create those connections for later in life as well. Off the back of that university course, I took a summer job working with Harrogate International Festival. So this was 98. I headed up looking after the production for their street theatre festival. And I suppose one of the crucial things, and one of the things that I've been really fortunate about, is that off the back of that particular project, that summer fresh out of college job, I got to know the person who was back then the marketing manager for Harrogate Theatre, amongst other people. The person who was that marketing manager then very, shortly after the festival moved on to a different job in a different organisation and became the, I think back then, the administrative director, she was called, of Mind the Gap in Bradford. And this, dating back to 1998, was the start of my relationship with Bradford as a city, but also with a number of people in this room, but also, with projects and things that were happening there. So I took on a role off the back of that street theatre festival through a chance happening over a drink at the end of festival party. Took on the role of production manager for one of Mind the Gap's early tours. So this was 98. It was a tour called The Big Picture. And I spent 18 months working with Mind the Gap as their in-house production manager, driving a rusty old van to small-scale touring venues around the country, staying in dodgy bed and breakfasts, for one-nighters before we packed up and moved on to the next city. And for what felt like a lifetime, I was doing a lot of that sort of work. Very it's almost that sort of cutting, what might be described as, cutting your teeth kind of work, where you're covering all those different roles yourself. You're not only driving the van, but you're supervising stage management team. You're working with the cast and company. You're rigging the lights. You're building the set. You're running the sound. You're doing the operating. You've done all the bits of kind of tour logistics of sorting accommodation and sort of transport and routes. And if you can imagine such a time, this was. I honestly can't really even imagine or remember how we managed to make this work, but this was in a time before sat-nav as well, where we were having to go from venue to venue, from town to town, navigating ourselves with maps that I'd printed out in advance to the venue with sort of written instructions and things like that. So what felt like a very different time. What was interesting about this, though, is that one of the things that I found working as a freelancer, after about 18 months, I made the move out of a permanent position with Mind the Gap into freelance work, because there was a number of opportunities coming up, a number of people asking me to get involved with projects. But again, what happened for me was that those links, those connections, those people I met along the way became the next clients and the people that were recommending me to the next jobs and so on and so forth. And I can almost map out my entire career to date through these connections from one project to another, which is a great position to be in and a really privileged position to be in. And one of the interesting things, and it's useful to keep this sort of thread running through in some respects, is that this image here, this is 2012, so we've moved forward from when I left Mind the Gap in 99, moved forward to 2012 and the Cultural Olympiad, where at this point Mind the Gap had moved up a scale again and had taken on some bigger projects, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to come back to support them at that point to work on the Irresistible project. That's in its London showing outside the National Theatre back in 2012 as part of the Cultural Olympiad. And then again, fast forward to this time last year, and that is Zara. I don't know if any of you saw Zara or have heard about it, but the giant baby project that we, as it became known, that we ran in partnership with Walk the Plank, and again, I was fortunate to work as one of the sort of the production team on that, looking after a lot of the more of the digital production side of that, so a lot of the sort of the big screens, cameras and things like that. So along the way I've maintained a relationship with a number of organisations that have provided a good foundation, a good bedrock for the work that I'm doing. And actually, as should happen in any career, in any sort of work, as the organisation grows, your experience and your practice grows, and the two things kind of run in parallel with each other. So as my experience and practice grew alongside Mind the Gap getting bigger and more complicated as an organisation, we kept pace with each other as those sorts of things happened. Now, along the way in between and in and around this, I've had roles like I was the producer for Bradford Festival and Mailer for a number of years before it all moved into the city centre and was retaken over by the council. So basically I started out as production manager back in 2003 and stayed with the festival and Mailer through until 2010, by which point we were peaking with, in 2009 certainly we had what was then a sort of 12-day festival with across the city with big international acts coming to do those large outdoor spectacles. We had the Mailer, which attracted at that point 200,000 people to Peel Park over the course of 2 days. So it was quite a substantial event. So I've got a real sort of I suppose it's quite a range of different approaches in my work, quite a range of different things. And again, all things that have sort of one has built out of another to another. Just jumping back quickly to the time when I mentioned as Manchester a city of drama back in 1994, the technical director then was a guy called Jack Thompson. And I just make this point to illustrate how useful these contacts and connections can be, even over a long period of time. This event is the opening of last year's Manchester International Festival. That on screen there is Yoko Ono. There's a crowd of 5,000 people in front of the screen in one of the big squares in Manchester. Jack Thompson is now technical director of Manchester International Festival. Back 30 years ago or 25 years ago to 1994, he was technical director of Manchester City of Drama. I worked a lot with him in 94, and then we've not really had much contact over the last 25 years. Early last year, I got a call out of the blue from Jack going, been following your career with interest. We've got a job coming up to look after the opening of the festival. Are you interested? And it was one of those things that, I was really surprised that A, he still knew who I was at that point, and B, he would just call up out of the blue like that. But Manchester International Festival do things in a particular way. They have a particular way of making stuff happen, which doesn't always please people. But one quick cup of coffee and a chat later, and I was production managing the opening of Manchester International Festival. So based on work that I'd done as a student 25 years earlier. So, I've been very fortunate in my trajectory. There's been a lot of great opportunities, but as a freelancer, as my practice has changed and developed and grown over the years, the organisations and the projects that I'm engaging with have changed and grown and morphed as well. So there's a lot of different things that I do in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. One of the things that I want to talk or the structure, if you like, that we're going to talk through today, I want to get a little bit more into some of the sort of some of the structure of this, some of the principles and ideas behind what we're doing. You've heard enough about me and my work now, just to give you a bit of foundation. So we're going to talk about some of the core principles associated with what I would think of as being I'm just reading the chat. Do you want to tell us a bit on here? So yeah, I want to look at some of the core principles of what I think make for good production management and a good relationship between creative and delivery. We want to look at some of the roles and the duties, some of the responsibilities. Then we'll do a little bit of a practical planning exercise, just to partly so I can stop talking and you can start talking a bit, and then we'll look at production phases. And then again, I just want to at the end just revisit this idea of the link between creative and production, and sort of lay out a little bit of not a manifesto so much, but just give you a perspective on it, which hopefully might help you think about some of these roles in a slightly different way. Does that sound all right? Has anybody got any questions at this point before we kick off into that? Good. Okay. Great. So first up, this is a core tenet of everything I've stood for and believed over the last 25 years. This is knowledge of the technical makes creativity possible. And the reason that I open with this is that one of the things that I think it's really important to understand about where I'm coming from in my work and my practice, and especially in terms of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is that I don't necessarily make a distinction between creative roles or artistic roles and technical roles in necessarily the same way as other people do. That's not to say that there aren't different disciplines and different skills that come along with different roles, but fundamentally, as a creative practitioner, whether you're an artist working in isolation or you're a production manager supporting artists working, if you have a good understanding of the technical requirements of a project, you are going to be better able to realise the creative potential of that work. Just to sort of stress that point, the better you can unpick and understand the technical things that need to be done, the more you can expand and explore the creative opportunities there. So if you like, that's I suppose a sort of starting point for the discussion. That's the perspective that I'm coming from in all the work that I do and the way that I approach these sorts of things. I'm going to go back to this to just chat through this next one, because it's a bit easier to see that like this. Before we get into any sort of roles, I appreciate that might be a bit small on your screen looking at it, but I'll read it through. Before we get into any specific role descriptions or anything like that, I want to address this idea of production as functions rather than people. And the reason for this is that if you're an independent artist and maker working by yourself, and you don't have a production manager, or you don't have a stage manager, or you don't have a lighting technician or a sound engineer working with you, those functions don't disappear. They still exist, they just have to be done in different ways. So this is why I think it's important to start from a perspective of talking about these as functions rather than specifically as roles. So when we're thinking about production functions, they work alongside artists to make great ideas happen. Yeah, the production functions, these these personnel have responsibility for navigating between a bold vision of an idea and how feasibly to deliver it. Yeah, working with the artists, production people, production functions work out how to locate the idea and bring it to life in the world of its audience. And then finally on this, the artistic and the production roles are the core fundamentals in the creation of great work and its engagement with the public. So again, just to stress the point that if you take away this notion of there being a separation between different people delivering different things, and just understand this as being different duties or different functions that need to be delivered to create good work, that hopefully starts to help us navigate a way around some of the terminology and things like that. There are a lot of different titles that are given to different people in different jobs, but actually that's not always the useful place to start. It's much more useful to look at these functions and to understand a little bit about what they do and how they work. So when we're talking about these production functions, in fact, I'll go back to this. When we're talking about these production functions, there's a lot of different titles. They vary from project to project. They vary dramatically, and I've found this in my own professional work as well, is that I can have the same title in running Bradford Mailer as I can have touring a small-scale theatre show for Mind the Gap in the back of a van doing one-nighters in CD arts centres. But the title is the same, even though the role is completely different. So it's important to sort of understand the functions outside of the titles as well. So they vary from project to project, and they'll all have slightly different emphasis. They generally exist, as I've said, whether or not there's someone in the role. So if you are an artist and you don't have a costume department, someone still needs to sort you out a costume for your presentation, for your performance. Even if there's not a wardrobe supervisor to do that for you, the function still exists, even if someone's not in that role. And what you'll find is that there is a lot of common ground between some producer roles, some technical management roles, some production management roles, some stage management roles, and so on and so on and so on. There is a lot of common ground in these. And one of the key things that I'm going to just sort of spend a little bit of time looking at now is just reiterating the fact that these are actually all have some sort of management responsibility. And that's one of the sort of the key things to think about, is that actually you get to a certain point within the organization of things, within the organization of projects or your activities, where just recognizing that there's management responsibility to be taken is an important thing. And again, we're still not even at the point yet of saying, yeah, that's a production manager who does that, and that's a stage manager that does that. We're just understanding that in every setup, in every successful delivery of something, there's some management to be done. Okay. So if we're thinking about what makes for good management, I just want to introduce this concept to you. This is about strategy. It'll become clear why I'm talking about this in a minute, and I appreciate that this feels like a sort of a minor diversion into a different subject, but it'll all become clearer as we go along. So to create an effective strategy, what you're asking for, or what the academics tell us we should be looking for, is simple and consistent vision and goals, a thorough appreciation of the external environment, acute awareness of available resources, and then effective implementation. Okay, so within that, we've got the same sort of things that you might expect as a production manager to be getting to grips with within a creative project. Start off simple and consistent vision and goals. In production functions, you have to understand the creative objectives of the project in order to effectively deliver the results that people are looking for. The better you're able to understand the vision of the project, the better you're able to make decisions about how you're going to allocate resources. We'll come on to a bit more on that. Thorough appreciation of the external environment. This is just a good thing to know. You need to know what's going on in the world. You need to know what's happening around you and around the project to make sure that, from a production point of view, you are putting the right foundations in place to enable the creative team to deliver the project that they want to deliver. If you're not understanding the environment that you're working in or the context that you're working in, it's very difficult to put the right foundations in place to ensure success. Because fundamentally, that's the key thing that we're working towards in this, is that we want successful creative projects delivered in the way that the artistic team have imagined them to meet that artistic aspiration. So a thorough appreciation of the external environment. One of the key things that we'll come on to about production management is it's to do with resources, it's to do with money and time and people. So having an acute awareness of the available resources is really key fundamental thing. And then this final one, effective implementation. How are you taking those resources? How are you looking at the context that you're working in? How are you thinking about the environment that you're in, and mushing all that together into something which becomes effective implementation? It seems like quite a highfalutin way of digesting or understanding what we're talking about, but I think from my point of view, the more effectively we can reflect on our practice and understand what it is that we're doing and why we're delivering what we're doing, the more effectively we'll be delivering, the more effectively we'll be able to meet the objectives of the project, the more effectively we'll be able to underpin and support that artistic ambition within the project. So thinking about sort of a bit more management stuff. Good management. So this again, if you put this into a production management context, it just helps again give a little bit of an overview about how I approach things. So I tend to work, and I see good management as being consultative and collaborative. It relies on a network of talented individuals or talented leaders. So as a production manager, I rarely am at the centre of attention. I'm rarely the person actually doing delivery. Fundamentally, what I'm doing is I'm coordinating teams of other people who are much more expert in their specialist areas to deliver the stuff that they're good at delivering. So the task is to interpret and articulate the organisation's vision, or an artist's vision, to inspire a sense of shared endeavour, enable an organisation and its people to succeed, to build capacity within teams, and trust others to take the lead within certain structures. So again, it's that thing that it's about facilitating, it's about enabling, it's about putting foundations in place, it's about making sure that what you're offering people is a mechanism where people can bring their best work and contribute it in a way which is most useful and most effective for the project and for achieving the outcomes of the project. So the focus is less on central leading figure and more on facilitating groups of people to build on the creative strengths of an organisation, an idea or a concept. Now I shall have to admit I've pinched that language from a report on effective leadership that was written back in 2004 by Hewison, but the principles that it sort of lays out are really good and really important for when we're starting to think about effective production management. It's this thing of bringing together teams, laying down foundations, enabling people to deliver their specialist area in the way that's most effective and most appropriate for the creative outputs of the project. So when we start to think about that sort of stuff and we start to look at that kind of thing, it's quite useful to start interrogating a little bit about what some of the core characteristics or skills of an effective production manager or production personnel could be. I've started with creative enthusiasm, fundamentally because there is a real risk, and we will all have seen this at some point. There's a real risk that if you're not enthusiastic about creative work as a production manager, you're not going to bring out the best in the project. You're not going to have that shared sort of you're not going to be able to articulate that shared vision in the way that you need to effectively manage teams of people. You need to be a robust planner. You need to be able to think about what you're doing, put pen to paper, go through it with a level of detailed focus. You need a good grasp of finance. We'll come on to more of that in a bit, but yeah, that's a really fundamental and good grasp of finance. You need to be willing to take responsibility. as I said, it's a management role, so you need to be willing to take responsibility. You've got to be good at keeping cool under all conditions. And this is something, again, which we will all have come across, that separate out different categories of people, especially in the production side of things, where temperament temperament is something which is very often reserved for artists, but I'm sure that we will all know and all have seen in production personnel different temperaments and different people handling different situations in different ways. Lisa and Ben are both grinning at this because I think they both know who I might be talking about at the moment. But there's particular examples that we've seen along the way. So keeping cool under all conditions, not least because you're going to be the buck stop. The chances are, when everything's going to shit, you're going to be the person who's going to have the responsibility to sort it out. So if you can't keep calm under whatever pressures are coming down on you, then you're not really you're not the right character for the role. You might have the right skills, but skills and character need to be balanced effectively in this sort of thing. You need to be able to think ahead, not least because you want to be able to anticipate and second guess stuff that you need to plan for, stuff that you need to prepare for. You need a solid understanding of all the areas you're managing and supervising. And this is a really important point, that as a production manager, you don't need to know how to, you don't need to know how to put in a new, you don't need to know how to assign a DMX address to a Martin, I don't know, a moving light, an intelligent lighting fixture. You don't need to know the detail of how you do that. You don't necessarily need to know whether you're right to use a cardioid mic or an omni mic for a particular application. You don't necessarily need to know what sort of paint goes best on steelwork, but you do need to know that these are some of the things that other people in your teams might need to be dealing with. And you do need to know that they are things that might impact decisions that you're making about budget. There are things that might impact decisions that you're making about schedules. So you need to have a good enough grasp of all the disciplines that you're supervising and that you're managing, all those teams that you're managing, and a clear enough grasp of the vocabulary to be able to have meaningful conversations with people about what they're dealing with, where they need to be allocating their time and resources, and how they're going to be effectively moving on with what they're delivering. Okay. You need to be considerate. You need to be dependable. You need to be diplomatic. And this last one, this is a bit of a contentious one, but there is an amount of humility that needs to be attached to the role as well. As a production manager, and pretty much with any backstage role, you almost never will be recognised by the world at large for the work that you do. I can now, after 30 odd years, I can say with some certainty that millions, literally millions of people have seen my work. Not least because, things like the launch of the Manchester International Festival last year was broadcast on the telly worldwide. So I know that as a production manager, millions of people worldwide have engaged with my work. Not a single one of them will have a faintest idea who I am, or what my involvement was, or what I did to make all that happen. And so that humility thing is actually just about accepting that it's not my place to be that figurehead. It's not my place to be the person who's getting the attention or the praise or the gratitude for what's been delivered. As a production manager, my function is to lay the groundwork for artists to deliver their content most effectively. And going in with that sort of attitude and that kind of ethos actually irons out a whole load of crinkles along the way. If you're clear that that's fine, that's how I've set my stall out, that's what I'm there to do, and that does help kind of keep things ticking over along the way. Let's get that back on screen. So, roles and duties. sort of things that you might be covering off in this sort of thing. And again, remember, this is something that you might need to understand whether you've got someone attached to the role or not. So this could still be something that you're having to do as an artist working independently, whether you've got a production manager, a stage manager, a technical director, any of the above. You need to be able to plan and control a schedule, a production schedule. You need to be able to estimate costs and manage budgets. You need to determine the resources required. So you need to be able to, early on in a process, say, yeah, if we're going to do this, then we need that, that, and that. You need to manage those resources and make sure they're working to meet the aspiration of the project. You need to make decisions about how stuff's used, maintained, modifications, procurement, etc., etc. You almost certainly will almost always be having to manage health and safety. You'll have a responsibility around maintaining quality standards. This is something which is not necessarily always understood by colleagues in the industry, is that actually from a production point of view, you are the one with the means to ensure quality across the board. And that's something which should be held up. That should be as well as being the buck stop, being that sort of arbiter of the rights and wrongs and making things work is really important. Depending on your organisation, you might need to be monitoring and reviewing performance of staff or contractors or teams. And then you need to be ensuring efficient collaboration and cooperation between relevant departments. And again, this is a really key thing, is that right at the heart of what you're doing is about making sure that people are delivering and are able to deliver their functions in the most efficient and effective way possible. What sort of people might you have on your team? You might find that you are supervising or looking after, as a production manager, set design, costume, lighting, sound, video, projection, staging, structures, power, generators, stage crew, fencing, trackway, marquees. It could be anything, but it's very dependent on the sort of project that you're working on. The really crucial thing to think about with this is that every single piece of work that you do will be slightly different. The shape and size of every piece of work that you do will be slightly different, and therefore the way that you work with these sorts of resources will be very bespoke and very specific to the project that you're doing. So being able to start out in your planning, and again, and I'll keep saying this as long as it's relevant, goes the same for you as an artist. If you are working as an artist practitioner without a production manager, being able to identify the resources that are required at the beginning of the process will help you budget and help you plan and help you manage those resources more effectively along the way to ensure that you're delivering the most effective and sort of best realized version of the project that you're doing. Let me just pull this one up here. A competent and capable production manager understands the roles and requirements of each of a diverse specialist staff that they need to produce a successful project. So that's just reiterating that point, that as a capable production manager, you need to understand what your teams are doing, those specialist staff that you're bringing in. You don't need to be able to do it yourself, but you need to be able to understand enough about what's going on to be able to talk with confidence to people as they're doing it. Now, understand, I just want to go on to look at where production management might fit in within different structures, within different organisations, because it's useful to know, and I know that one of the questions that came in before we started this was a slightly sort of beginning to look at some of this in terms of how it fits in. This slide, I'll bring the right one up and get rid of that. This slide is, you won't be able to read that, and that's absolutely fine. That is an organisational structure from Opera North. So it's an opera company, it's a large opera company, it's obviously based just down the road, and this is really just to give you an example, a very quick example of how production management might fit in within a bigger organisation. So at the top there in the purple box, you've got the board, the trustees. The little blue box beneath it is the chief exec, head of the organisation. And then when you get to that pink line along the top, you've got there your heads your heads of department, your directors, your key senior management team. And in this case, in Opera North's case, the fourth box in from the left-hand side is the technical director, which could be interchangeable in terms as production manager, and then beneath them is stage management, lighting teams, sound teams, stage crews, a whole range of different departments coming down a long line underneath the production management. So in terms of sort of what you might think of as more conventional hierarchy, that tends to be where production management sits in bigger organizations. It sits as part of that senior management team. For me as a freelancer, I will get brought in and bolted onto the side of organizations as a production manager to work in a funny sort of way outside of their normal internal structures, but effectively as connected to a project as part of a senior project team or that sort of thing. So, it can be very different in different ways. In smaller settings, if you're, a small company, it might be that those roles or those tasks are being done by a collection of people, being managed in different ways by a collection of people, but it's important to recognize that they are still roles that have responsibility and authority attached to them. Effective production management needs to go alongside genuinely delegated authority. It's no good having responsibility in one hand if you don't have authority in the other hand to do something about it. Yeah, this is one of the problems where this is very often where things sort of come apart in projects, is that things are expected of people that they simply can't deliver because they don't have the authority backing them up to be able to deliver it. A different way to look at the sort of how production management fits in is this sort of model. So we have there a big blue box, a big blue circle, creative teams, or the artistic idea, the artist, the creative personnel. Alongside it, we have the delivery team, we have the resources. To really understand where I think a production manager sits most effectively and delivers most effectively, you have to make it look like this. So effectively, the production manager is the person who bridges that gap between a creative idea and the creative team and the resources and delivery mechanisms to make it happen. And so as a production manager, you have a combination of art and science. As a production manager, you are understanding the technical to make the creative possible. So you're bridging that gap right in the middle of the two things there. Is there any questions at that point? I appreciate that time is rapidly running away from us, isn't it? Has anybody got any questions before we move on? I'm going to go on in a minute just to look at a little planning exercise together. And then there will be time at the end for Q&A. But just before I carry on, is there anybody's burning issues at that point?
No, I don't think so.
No? Great. Okay, well, I'll crack straight on. Okay, so we are all capable of planning. I want to talk about planning as from a production management point of view. We're all capable of planning. We are all capable of doing it. So whether you are a production manager or a technical director or a stage manager, or you're a producer, or you're an artist or a craftsperson or a maker or a musician, you are capable of planning because we are born as human beings with an innate ability to plan, something that we call the natural planning model. So just very quickly, just because I've talked a lot and it would be nice to hear from some of you, what are some of the things that we plan in everyday life? Day to day.
What we're going to do at the weekend.
What we're going to do at the weekend. Perfect. Good example. Yeah. What else?
What you're going to eat during the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. What you're going to eat. Meals and things. What else?
Holiday.
Sorry, say that again.
Birthday parties.
Yep. Birthday parties. So life events, all those sorts of things.
Jed has said Christmas, and then Uzma has said holidays.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, holidays, Christmas, activities that we're taking part in, things that we want to do, nights out, Well, once upon a time we were able to go on nights out. Meeting up with friends. Once upon a time, all these things are all things that in our normal day-to-day life we're able to plan. We're able to make decisions about them. We're able to think about we sort of do it subconsciously, pulling the right ingredients together to make stuff happen. So shift this way, what are the factors that influence the decisions that you make when you're planning in this way, day-to-day stuff?
How much time you've got?
Yep, how much time you've got. Yep. What else?
Family responsibilities.
Yeah, so are the responsibilities are the things that you might have to be balancing against it, yeah?
Budget and finances.
Yeah, very good. Budget, yeah, finances, absolutely.
Uzma said the weather and Jed said money again.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I mean, you've really sort of you've ticked all the boxes across there. That if you think about it, in our daily life, we're making decisions. Chauvin said where you get resources from, where you're going to get your food from, and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. All these things, we're making decisions in day-to-day life every day, which are not dissimilar to the sorts of decisions that you might have to make thinking about the production resource that you want to put into your creative project. We don't think about it as being a particular skill set or a particular discipline when we're doing it day to day, but we all know that people who are effective at managing their day-to-day life will be the people who know that they've got the ingredients in the fridge that they need for the dinner they're cooking tonight. They will be the people that know that when they get the bus at 9:20, it gets them to where they need to be at 10:20, so they've got the 15 minutes then to walk to their meeting at 10 o'clock. All the time, every single day, we make decisions based on the commitments that we've got, what we want successful outcomes to be in our day, and we make those decisions based on the resources we've got available, what the external environment's doing, quite literally the external environment as well. Do you get the bus because it's a 20-minute walk across town, or because it's raining, are you going to get a taxi? If you're getting a taxi, have you got the finances to do that? All these sorts of things, they're things that we just instinctively make as decisions as we go throughout our day. But it's the very sort of simple essence, if you like, of what makes up good production planning. Is the same sort of thing, thinking about how resources are going to be allocated to what sort of activities to enable you to deliver what sort of results. So, I mean, just moving on through the natural planning model, you define the purpose and principles, you understand what it is you're trying to achieve. You think about what the outcome looks like, what's going to be on the dinner table in front of the kids tonight. You think about how or what you could do to achieve that. Then you organise those resources. And then the final step is this thing of getting down into sort of the detail of it and working out what the next actions are in each case. So we're still in this very simple natural planning model, as it's called, which is basically this day-to-day instinctive thing that we all do. But this final point, this agreeing the next actions, this is a key part as well of understanding the production process, is that it's all well and good recognising what resources are needed where and how to bring in the right people and pull the right teams together. But if you're not understanding the very next action that someone needs to take to make something happen, there's a good chance that you won't start to recognise those dependencies as well. As a production manager, you really want to be certain that you're not the bottleneck in anything happening. Being the bottleneck basically it's a very easy trap to fall into. But in production terms, effectively what you'll have is from one side, you'll have a lot of creative aspiration coming, and from the other side you'll have a lot of balancing of resources and time and money and demands being made on reporting and health and safety and all those sorts of things. And if you, in the middle of that, end up being this sort of this small straw that all that's trying to be sucked through, what you end up with is you end up with both sides not progressing in the way that they should do. You end up with things being missed, you end up with deadlines being missed, you end up with decisions not being able to be made. And fundamentally, and this is a really important point for all of us in the work that we're in, particularly those of us in this room, everything that we do has limited time and limited resources available, limited money available. So in order for us to most effectively deliver the creative outputs that we want to deliver, we have to be able to make sure that we're working as efficiently and as effectively as we can, and we have to make sure that all the people around us that we're supporting and supervising, and the foundation that we're putting down is enabling people to work as effectively and efficiently as they can. Because fundamentally, if you end up not making a decision which delays a rehearsal process starting, or the director for a show is asked for something to be in the rehearsal room and that information's not flowed in the right direction to the right team to make it happen, which means that they then have to postpone rehearsing that scene. It means that the wrong actors have been called on the wrong day. So a very small thing around a bit of ineffective communication or poor timing has a knock-on effect to what's happening in rehearsals, which then actually will have a knock-on effect to the schedule for the rest of that week, which will have a knock-on effect to the rehearsal schedule for the rest of the period, which will ultimately have a knock-on effect to how effectively that team have been able to do their bit of the job by the time the show opens 3 weeks down the line. And the consequence of this is that then compromises have been made in the output, the creative output. Compromises have been made which have meant that a small bit of incidental production mishap somewhere early on in the process has had a direct impact on the successful delivery of a creative project. It might not be noticeable, it might not be tangible, but it's the sort of thing that where resources are limited and where time is limited, you need to be working with them as effectively as you can. What have we got here? Just closing off the natural planning model thing. You get things done by defining done and agreeing what doing looks like. Again, I quite like from time to time just to be able to distill these things into really simple ideas. If you define done and then agree what doing looks like, you're on the right tracks. Another very simple model which helps you start thinking about production management, and I want to just, as our sort of one of our closing activities, I want to run a little exercise together on this. But the 5 W's, you will have all come across these, but they are as applicable to planning production, to doing production management, as they are to any other sort of process, any other planning process. Figuring out what needs production managing. Okay, so why? Why are you doing the project? What's inspired it? Where's the idea come from? What is the main driver for it? The reason that you need to know that is because that, again, will inform decisions that you're making about how resources are deployed. So if you understand why you're doing something, it can help you then make decisions about how to do something. Quick example of this. If one of the priorities of an organisation or a project is to engage volunteers as much as possible to help build community, then you will make very different decisions to if that isn't a priority for the organisation. You can get much better stewarding done, potentially, by paying a team to do it. But if one of your priorities is to encourage volunteers and to engage and build community through that, then you will make a decision informed on that to put resource into training and support and supervision for that volunteer workforce, because that will help you meet those priorities. So understanding why helps you make decisions about deployment of resources. Thinking about who's coming, who's involved, who's creating, who's delivering, what contractors might you need to support that. Understanding when it's happening will have all of these things have knock-on implications. So if an event is happening outdoors in, well, looking out of my window at the moment, if an event's happening outdoors in the beginning of June, there's a good chance that it'll be raining. So that when is going to have an impact onto a decision that you're going to make about how resources are used to make sure that you're effectively delivering that project at that time in that way. Where is exactly the same, and all of this loops back to the why as well. Are you choosing a destination? Are you choosing a location? Are you choosing a venue based on a creative imperative within the project, or is it just an arbitrary thing? So understanding the why will help you make a decision about the where. And again, this might come down to if the where, which is the most important thing, isn't available at the when, which is less important, then you will make a decision to change the when for the sake of the where. So the understanding why you're making the decisions will help then influence those things along the way. And then finally of these, it's the what, and that's the what is it? What are you doing? And when you start to imagine that and you start to think through that, and you put yourself in the place of a participant or an attendee or someone that's engaging with your event, that all of a sudden is the point where you go, right, there's 50,000 things that I need to put on the list now, that I need to book or that I need to organise or that I need to coordinate. Because as you walk through that participant experience, that attendee experience, and you turn up at the gate at 7:30 when the show is starting, and you look around in your mind's eye, you're looking around and you're thinking about what's there, all of a sudden you go, okay, so we need some staffing, we need some box office people, we need maybe some signage to have got someone there. We've got to identify where the where is. We will have had to market something to that point, and are they all there? Have they got all that information at the right time to be able to let people know in the right way? And as soon as you then start looking in any one of those single areas, so you go, okay, box office staff, all of a sudden you've got to then think about, well, what system are they using to deliver the box office? What does that mean they need on site while they're delivering it? Where are the box office people going to be? Do they need a tent, or is there a desk inside the door? Where's the desk coming from? Are they standing up, or are they going to have to sit down? Are we going to have to plug something in? Do they need to print tickets out? Do we need to bring a printer in for them? And before you've even got across the threshold, what are they going to be doing with the money? Are they taking cash? Will they be able to take cards? How are we going to keep the money safe? You've not even got into the event yet, and we've got a list of 20 things which will open out into 20 more things, which will each open out into 20 more things. And actually this exercise, this mechanism, is a great way of starting to unpick and understand, and you literally are imagining the production requirement into existence. And so it starts out as an exercise, going through those steps, going, right, what's next, what next? Okay, I'm seeing that, I'm understanding that. You're picturing that final result, and you do it far enough back. You do it so far back that by the time you're there, you've been able to put all those resources in place in the right order, in the right sequence, in the right time to make stuff happen. Have a little look at this, and then we'll have a chat about this exercise. So I'm going to move on to that. I'm going to do that, and
God, without beginning, I am maker unmade. I am life. divide the dark and light. The sun in the day, the moon in the night. Earth here, and hell. Behold now, sir, and thou wilt see such kingdoms, sir, and such country. And all this will I give to thee forevermore. Thou wilt fall and honor me.
Okay, that is a big community project from a few years ago that I was working as part of the production team on. That it's medieval mystery plays. They've been happening, well, I guess since medieval times, in York. It's a massive community project. That what you saw there was effectively, that was a film and trailer. It was a trailer that ran in cinemas around the area to sell tickets to promote the event. But it's a useful thing to use in this sort of context because there's quite a lot in there. It was a massive project. There was 2,500 community volunteers involved with it on stage and behind the scenes and in the band and in the costume department and everything. I mean, it was a project where the main focus was about getting people involved and people taking part. In that, what you saw on screen then, if you look at this now, that is the very start of the production process for building that environment, for creating that project. That down there is my crew on the ground marking out and measuring out the space to work out how big a stage we needed to build. It sounds like a ridiculous thing, but of course when you're working in an ancient scheduled monument site like that, there was no good site plans, there was no scale drawings, there was nothing useful to work from, so we had to start really from the ground up and actually go out, mark it all out, measure it all out, figure it out from there. Just now in discussion or in the chat, I will bring myself back up, how do we get from this empty space, grass with some old ruins, to what you've just seen on the video from a production point of view? What are the things that we need to be thinking about?
Everything.
Everything.
I was going to say the same.
Okay, so let's start off with some fundamental things. So I can tell you that there was 1,300 people sat and watched it every night for 40 nights. 30 nights. Yeah. So let's start with that. 1,300 people. What do we do with them?
We've got answers saying getting quotes for staging and equipment, lighting, time of year. We've got who needs to attend the markups, meetings, materials, and budget.
Brilliant. Okay,
Toilets.
Yeah, that's great.
Toilets.
Toilets. I'll come on to toilets in a minute. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So we've got that thing where we're starting to think about the resources. We're effectively, before we even started to make the show, we had to make the venue. So it added an extra layer of stuff on there, which meant that we had to effectively duplicate the process. So it wasn't just a scenery and lighting and costumes that we were thinking about. We were thinking about auditorium. We were thinking about seating. We were thinking about staging. We were thinking about toilets, about front of house facilities, a bar, a box office, back of house facilities, changing rooms, dressing rooms, wardrobe facilities. There's no power on that site, so we were having to think about generators. There's loads of good stuff coming up in the chat as well here. Backup plan, rain, yeah, you saw rain in that. The backup plan, interestingly, was that the audience were covered, and that if it started raining too heavily, we stopped briefly. the audience waited patiently, and then when the rain stopped, we started again. It was August in 2012, and it rained for 85% of the time, the Met Office reported, in August of 2012. So it was, it was pretty soggy, that one. But the each of those decisions, each of those things that we're looking at, each of those resources that we had to put in place from a production point of view had a series of dependencies and requirements linking one to another, to another, and to another, and so on, and so on, and so on. And what we found along the way was that there was even stuff that we hadn't quite thought of. And, you know, the reality is that when you're building something new for the first time in a complicated space, there's things that you don't quite account for. There's things that you don't quite plan for. So, for example, there is one access road to that site which wasn't wide enough to fit a porter cabin through. So although we wanted to use that kind of provision on site, we discovered quite early on that all of a sudden we had to budget in a whole different way to create the environment in a different way. And what we ended up in fact having to do was, you couldn't in fact turn an articulated lorry onto the site either. So all the seating, all the staging, all the scaffolding, I mean, there was something like 300 tons of scaffolding came on site. It all had to be taken to a depot outside the city, loaded into smaller trucks, and then shuttled on and off site. We had to take down a wall which is part of the original walls of the city of York, so part of the ancient protected ancient schedule monument. We had to take down in order to get production infrastructure in sight. And to do that, of course, you know, we didn't know that right at the start of the process, so the budgeting and the scheduling implications of that, where you have to get specialist team of archaeologist experts to, you know, to map out the wall and mark out every brick and look for every, you know, stone and pebble that was built in there and preserve it all, and then put it all back at the end of the project. You know, massive unexpected costs and complications. So, you know, I guess with a lot of this, I mean, I said I would mention about the toilets. It turned out that there wasn't any plumbing back of house, so the community and cast toilets had to be emptied 3 times a week. They were porta cabin toilets, but with tanks underneath them. Had to be emptied 3 times a week for 6 weeks while we were on site. 6 weeks of 3 times a week basically cost £300 a time. So we ended up spending nearly £1,000 a week just emptying the toilets. And of course we hadn't planned on that, because nobody really could have imagined. The first day of technical rehearsals, we got through, bearing in mind this is just people making cups of tea, we got through 42 litres of milk in the green room backstage on the first day of technical rehearsals. Again, it was just one of those things that, you know, we hadn't quite planned on those sorts of things, because, you know, until you've done something which is close, or you're growing, you know, towards those sorts of things, it's very hard to, you know, to sort of imagine every minute detail. But those minute details, not enough milk, bill for toilet emptying, those details can be managed if you've done that good longer lead planning, thinking about resources, thinking about scheduling, building in contingencies, allowing time for stuff to happen. You know, going back to that day on site early in March, where we started thinking about a project that wasn't happening till August, from a technical and production point of view, and we started measuring out and we started looking at shapes and sizes and what would fit where. And I mean, there was so much about that project that was complicated and problematic that I could talk for 2 hours just about the production challenges of that, but there isn't time for that now. So that's for another day, over a pint maybe. But the key thing with it is that the better you can plan and prepare for the things that are within your control and that are expected, the more effectively you'll be able to manage keeping a calm, cool head, those things that you weren't expecting or you didn't anticipate or come up out of the blue. And, you know, if we'd had more time, we could have spent longer going into the real detail, but there's some great comments coming up in the chat about this, the sort of stuff that you need to think about. one of the key things to think about with all of that is that, as well as identifying the fact that you need it, you need to be able to build in a recognition of when it's needed and how it's going to be deployed, in what order, in the right way. So if you like, the next level, once you get past that imagining of we'll need this, we'll need that, we'll need the other, is starting then to map out those things in, you know, plans and schedules, getting to a point where you're able to go, yeah, we have to get the freezers on site and the electricity turned on before we have the ice cream delivered. Seems like an obvious thing, but I've known situations where it's gone wrong. And if you don't make those decisions in the right order, and you don't make sure the right things are there in the right time, in the right way, that will have an impact on your budget and your resources, which will then in turn have an impact on your creative outputs. It's this thing that, you know, not turning the power on and melting the ice cream and losing, you know, £20,000 worth of vanilla ice cream tubs means that that money needs to come from somewhere else, which means that you've then not potentially got that available to spend on whatever the creative objective was. So you need to be thinking about all these sorts of things and thinking about these dependencies. So really the looking at logistics from a production point of view, of having the right resources at the right, in the right place at the right time, is another sort of key distillation of this. But then, you know, it's that sort of those other sort of planning, those timings, those other documents where you're starting to look at running times, schedules, pulling all those bits together. How and when are you going to deploy those resources to best effect? I'm not going to look at this now. There's production phases. I'm just conscious that we're time is marching on. Production phases. It's important. The one thing that I will say about this is that when you're thinking about these roles, either as the personnel from a personnel point of view, and when you bring in who to do what. So if you're an organisation looking to appoint a production manager to help you deliver your project, or you're an artist starting to think about your responsibilities for production delivery, understanding that there are multiple different phases within any project is really important, because that will help you then think about what the resources, how the resources need to be deployed at each stage. So just very quickly, in pre-production, which might be 6 months out, it might be 12 months out, it might be 18 months out, it might be that you bring in a production manager who comes to one meeting for half a day once a month. But by bringing that person in at that point, they can start to help you to make the right decisions about the right sort of resources for things later on down the line. But you might want to save some of that money to when you get to that build and load in time, where you're actually wanting production manager on site 7 days a week from, you know, morning, noon and night to supervise that side of the work. So you need to think about these phases. It's useful to think about these phases and think about how much time and energy and resource you're putting into it, particularly when you're thinking about bringing in other people to work with you. The very last thing that I want to show you, hit the right button, is this slide here. That one. Oops. There is no good diagram to illustrate this point, but this is about as good as I've got so far. If anybody can come up with a better way of explaining this or diagramming this, then do let me know. Effectively, what we're looking at here is, on the one side you have creative aspiration, and on the other side you have a level of production engagement. Yeah? And this is the key thing with this, is that this is the level that your production, the level that you're committing time and energy and thought, or the type of people you're working with, or the resource that's available, is on the one side, and the creative aspiration and the output are on the other. And the idea with this diagram is that it's sort of trying to illustrate that there's some sort of symbiotic relationship there. That effectively what you've got is that you're balancing constantly these two sides of the equation. As your creative aspirations go up, your production resource should be pulled up to help you deliver at that level. If it doesn't, what tends to happen is that your production resource stays down here. And remember, might be the money and time that you've got to put into it, or it might be the type of people that you're working with, or it might be the sort of amount of time and energy that you're putting into it as a creative practitioner. If your production resource stays down, it drags this other side down with it. As your creative aspiration goes up, your production resource should go up as well. If, and this happens sometimes in some circumstances, if you find the winning team, the right person to work with on a production, from the production perspective, then actually that person can help bring up your creative aspirations as well, by laying good foundations, by paving the way for creative teams and artistic individuals, pulling them together, working with them, managing them, facilitating that in a way which means that actually the creative ambition can be raised up as well. So I suppose that's my closing thought really, is that this is a symbiotic relationship, or it absolutely should be. If you find yourself in a point where you've got creative ambition up here and production people down here, then you're going to be dragged down. You need to figure this out. You have to be able to keep those two things in balance. And what you'll find is that actually that balance will then grow, and it will be a bit sort of icky along the way potentially, but as creative ambition goes up, you bring the production resource to support it, that perhaps goes up a little bit beyond, then the creative ambition can grow to meet it, and vice versa, and it keeps going and going and going like that. And that really, if I was laying out a manifesto, that would be the sort of the heart of how to make good production management work, whether it's about the people you're working with, or it's about how you as a creative practitioner commit time and energy and resource and thought to it. That's what you should be doing. You should be matching your creative ambition with your production engagement. And I think that's about it. The rest of it's simple. So, any questions?
There's a question from Kat.
Yes,
Group chat.
which is a very, very good question. It's a really good question. It's just there in the chat. I'll just read it out for people in case you're not looking. How would you suggest starting to plan a production as an individual artist with no production team without feeling overwhelmed? It's a really good question, and I hope that I haven't put you in a position where you now feel overwhelmed. That wasn't my intention at all. I think that the one of the key starting points for all of this sort of thing is actually just going back to something simple like that. And this can feel a little bit contrived, but actually just laying yourself out that 5 W's exercise, that what, where, when, why, what, where, when, and who. That's 5 W's. Lay that out. Do it as, put it down on a piece of paper and just start to, spider diagram out from that. It's actually the reality with this is that it takes a little bit of time, and you have to commit a little bit of time to starting to understand what the next steps are that you need to take. One of the key things, and I still do this and I still have this as a sort of something that I have to keep reminding myself of, is that from where I am now, I don't now need to understand everything about what's happening 6 months down the line when the project's finished. I only need to understand now what the very next thing is that I need to do. Yeah. So getting to a point where you start mapping out your 5 W's, you start pulling things out, and with each of those things, under the who, you might see that, I don't know, you want to work with a visual artist who's going to do some, make some contributions to the thing. You might put under the who that you want to attract a different particular type of community group. All those sorts of things start to spider out. Then take each of those and go, okay, if I was going to make just that happen, forget about the whole project. If I was just going to make that one thing happen, what's the very next thing that I need to do? And the very next thing that you need to do is, it could be as simple as go on the internet and look up who that person is, or find an email address, or pick up the telephone and speak to someone, or email someone in Bradford Producing Hub to ask them a question if they could recommend someone who could do something like that. So it's that awful analogy, isn't it? I can't remember what it is about eating an elephant. So you take it down into the smallest possible digestible parts, and only worry about that one thing at that moment. So once you've started mapping things out and you've got that bigger picture, actually just being able to be really sort of systematic about it, and it's this planning, it's this anticipating, this thinking ahead, just being systematic is by far and away the best way of managing the overwhelm, but also managing the stress and things that can come along with it. It can be quite stressful doing this job, but good planning and kind of finding digestible chunks is a good way of helping manage that. Does that make some sort of sense? Okay. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do we have any other questions or any other thoughts before we wrap up?
Spreadsheets, someone's mentioned. Spreadsheets, best friend. Being able to put together a good spreadsheet as a production manager, it's an invaluable skill. If you're not sure how to work your way around a spreadsheet, then get some online training. Now is a really good time to be doing some online training, because a lot of people are offering stuff for free or for very cheap. So find yourself a little course, spend a bit of time learning to put a spreadsheet together. And as such, it's really interesting. I'm just a very quick aside on this. I'm part of a national network of production managers, and we talk about different training schemes and things that we might make available, or different sort of talks and what have you that we do online. And actually, one of the committee, who's a relatively experienced production manager, said that they would really appreciate someone doing a talk about making spreadsheets. So, and this is someone with sort of several, a good, what I would have thought would be long enough experience in the right field to really know how to make that work. But it just goes to show that it's at every level. But so Lisa will run one of these sessions on spreadsheets. Yes, I'm sure that there's brilliant. Any other questions? Is there anything else that's come up in the chat? That's
nothing on the chat so far. So we just wrap it up. Again, thank you so much, Ben, for joining us and giving us expertise. And thank you for the rest of the participants as well as joining us today evening. And so thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
That's great. It's nice to meet you all. I'll hopefully see you again soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. See you on the other side.
Thank you.